Welcome to Virtual Voices. I'm Eli, one of your AI virtual hosts. Join us as we review previous videos from YouTuber Emmaus Road Productions.
And I am Miriam. And together, we bring you a deep dive podcast powered by Google's NotebookLM. This podcast is a generic AI-generated summary of Emmaus Road Productions videos, and we don't cover everything. Please consider watching his full video linked in the description below.
Hey everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know how this works? We take a look at all those sources you've been meaning to get to and boil them down to just the really interesting stuff.
That's right.
Today we're tackling a video series, actually, by Emmaus Road Productions on YouTube, and they're going through Pastor Chip Ingram's book, Why I Believe.
It's a good one.
Yeah, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the resurrection of Jesus.
Oh, yeah. One of the most important parts of the Christian faith.
Absolutely. And Emmaus Road Productions has a 7-part series.
Okay.
Looking at all the different arguments for the resurrection that Pastor Ingram makes.
Awesome.
And this is part 2 of that series.
Okay, great.
So if you want to check it out, we highly encourage you to head over to Emmaus Road Productions' YouTube channel and give it a watch.
Absolutely.
So let's get started. Why is the resurrection such a big deal?
Well, I mean, the resurrection is the foundation of the Christian faith. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, actually addresses that very thing back in the first century. He says in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is useless, and so is your faith.
Wow. So no resurrection, no Christianity.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then Christians are to be pitied more than all men.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it really sets the stage for why this topic is so important to explore.
Okay, so Pastor Ingram gives 7 reasons why he believes in the resurrection. But in this specific video, Emmaus Road Productions really just focuses on the first 4.
Right.
So let's jump into reason number 1, which is the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay.
Now, you would think that this wouldn't even be a question, right?
Right.
Jesus was a real person. He lived. He walked the earth.
You would think so, but amazingly, there are academics who try to compare Jesus to a figure like King Arthur.
Really?
They suggest that he is more myth than man.
So they're saying he never even existed.
Exactly.
But isn't there a ton of evidence to support the fact that Jesus was a real person?
We have tons of evidence when it comes to ancient history and literature. You know, there are over 25,000 New Testament documents validating the existence of Jesus.
Wow.
That's a lot more than we have for somebody like Homer. You know, we only have 643 copies of Homer's Iliad.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So we actually have more evidence for the existence of Jesus than we do for Homer.
That's right.
That's crazy.
Oh.
Okay, so those New Testament documents, they're written by people who already believed in Jesus.
Right.
Couldn't you argue that those are biased sources?
Well, that's a fair point, but we also have non-biblical sources as well.
Fair.
Like Tacitus, the Roman historian, and Josephus, the Jewish historian. They both mention Jesus, and they corroborate key details about his life and death.
Wow. And these are people writing from outside of the Christian faith.
That's right. They were not writing from a place of faith.
That's amazing. And then we also have archaeological evidence too, right?
Yes, we do.
Emmaus Road Productions points out that, we've actually uncovered physical evidence that supports the biblical account. Well, they talk about the limestone fragment that mentions Pontius Pilate.
Right.
And for a while, there were scholars who actually questioned whether or not Pilate even existed.
It's true.
But that archaeological discovery basically put that argument to rest.
It's a great example of how physical evidence can be used to back up historical claims.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if Jesus wasn't a real person, why do we mark time using BC and AD?
That's a good question.
Right. It all centers around Jesus.
It does.
As Emmaus Road Productions puts it, that distinction wouldn't even exist without him.
Interesting.
Okay, so reason number 2 that Emmaus Road Productions pulls out of Pastor Ingram's book is the character of Jesus.
Okay.
And they point to this passage where Jesus says, "Which one of you convicts me of sin?"
Yeah, that's in John chapter 8. And Emmaus Road Productions really highlights how no one could find a flaw in Jesus' character, not even his harshest critics.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement to make.
It is, especially in that culture and time period.
Yeah, it's just interesting that they couldn't find anything to discredit him with.
Right. And even non-Christian religions acknowledge Jesus's moral stature.
Okay, so we're talking about like Islam and Buddhism.
Yeah. Islam, Buddhism.
Hinduism.
Hinduism.
They might not embrace his divinity, but they all recognize him as a remarkable and moral individual.
Wow. That really is pretty unique when you think about it.
It is.
So what kind of impact do you think his teachings had on that culture, especially given how brutal the Roman Empire was at the time?
Well, it's really a stark contrast, isn't it?
It is.
You know, you have the Roman Empire, which is all about power and conquest.
Uh-huh.
And then you have Jesus, who's teaching about love and forgiveness and compassion.
It's a completely different way of living.
It is. And it's just really interesting to see how those ideas, despite intense opposition, ultimately helped to shape Western civilization as we know it.
Yeah. And even Emmaus Road Productions kind of points out that, we're seeing the results of our culture moving away from some of those values today.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on to reason number 3, the works of Jesus. We're talking about miracles here.
We are.
Right. So Emmaus Road Productions emphasizes how even Jesus's opponents didn't deny that the miracles were happening.
They just questioned where his power was coming from.
Okay, but how do we know that that's true?
Well, think about it this way. If his miracles were just fabricated, wouldn't they have been debunked, especially during that period of intense persecution of the early Christians?
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of people who wanted to discredit Jesus.
Absolutely.
And his followers.
Right.
So if his miracles were fake, that would have been a prime opportunity to expose him.
Exactly.
And yet nobody did.
Nope.
Emmaus Road Productions poses this interesting question. If the miracles weren't real, would anyone have followed him?
I don't know. It really makes you wonder what drew people to him in the first place.
It does. So reason number 4 really gets to the heart of the matter. Did Jesus actually claim to be God?
Now, that's a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's a question that I think a lot of people still debate today.
Definitely.
So what evidence does Pastor Ingram give to support that claim?
Well, there are a lot of things that Emmaus Road Productions pulls out of the book.
Okay.
But first of all, you just have to look at Jesus' own words.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Okay.
No one comes to the Father except through me.
That's in John.
That's in John 14.
14.
And then later on, when he's asked directly if he is the Christ, the Son of God, he replies, I am.
Wow. So these are pretty direct claims to divinity.
They are.
Okay, so that's Jesus' words. But do we have any evidence outside of his own words?
We do. We have accounts of God the Father affirming Jesus' identity.
Okay.
Like at his baptism, where a voice from heaven declares, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. And then you also have the Transfiguration,
Okay.
where God speaks again from heaven and says, this is my beloved Son, listen to him.
So we have Jesus claiming to be God, and then we have God the Father kind of backing him up.
Right.
What about his disciples? What did they think?
Well, the disciples consistently affirmed Jesus' divine nature. Peter, for example, calls Jesus the Christ. And he refers back to his experience at the Transfiguration as an eyewitness of Jesus' majesty.
It seems like he had no doubt about who Jesus was.
He didn't?
What about John, the apostle who wrote the Gospel of John?
Mm-hmm.
What does he have to say?
Well, John's account is particularly interesting because he very clearly states that Jesus is the Word of God, existing from the beginning with God.
So that's about as clear a statement of divinity as you can get.
It is.
Okay, so we've got Jesus' words, we've got God the Father's affirmation, we've got the disciples' testimonies.
Yes.
Anything else that kind of points to Jesus claiming to be God?
Well, Emmaus Road Productions actually uses an example from a Roman senator named Pliny the Younger,
Okay.
who was persecuting Christians. And he wrote to the Emperor Trajan about the Christians that he was persecuting, and he said that these Christians would rather face death than deny Jesus.
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
It is. It speaks volumes about how strongly they believed in who Jesus was.
So even in the face of death, they were not willing to back down.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, so let's move on to those Old Testament prophecies that point to Jesus.
Okay.
Emmaus Road Productions mentions a couple of scholars who have identified hundreds of prophecies about the coming Messiah.
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
That's amazing.
It is. And they point to scholars like J. Barton Payne and Alfred Edersheim, who have done a lot of work in this area.
Okay.
And then they go on to talk about just the statistical probability of one person fulfilling even just a small number of those prophecies.
Yeah.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
How so?
Well, some calculations put it at 1 in 10 to the 157th power.
Wow. That's more than the estimated number of stars in the universe.
Yeah. So to think that all of those prophecies could be fulfilled in one person just by chance.
That's astronomical.
It really is. It's pretty amazing. So where do we go from here? I mean, that's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I think that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
We'll be back with the next part of our deep dive, looking at the question, Did Jesus really die? So stay tuned.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we were talking about some pretty convincing arguments for the life and identity of Jesus.
Right. We covered a lot of ground, the historical evidence for his existence, his character, the miracles, and ultimately his claim to be the Son of God.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how much evidence there is even beyond the Bible itself.
It is.
But today we're going to move into potentially even more contested territory.
Yeah.
We're going to be tackling the question, did Jesus really die?
Right, because if he didn't die, then the whole resurrection thing kind of falls apart.
Yeah, exactly. So this is reason number 5 from Pastor Ingram's book.
Okay.
The death of Jesus is undisputed.
Okay.
So what evidence is there to support that claim?
Well, the first and most obvious piece of evidence is the eyewitness accounts that we have in the Gospels.
Right.
These weren't just random people observing from afar. These were individuals who knew Jesus intimately and witnessed his crucifixion firsthand.
Okay, but couldn't those accounts be exaggerated or even fabricated over time?
Yeah. Well, it's not like they were taking notes or recording things as they happened.
Right.
But the Gospels were written relatively soon after the events they describe, at a time when many eyewitnesses were still alive.
So if the accounts were inaccurate, people would have spoken up and challenged them.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have eyewitness accounts.
Yes.
And then we also have to consider just the brutal nature of Roman crucifixion.
Right. This wasn't a quick or peaceful death.
No. It was designed to inflict maximum suffering.
It was.
So it's pretty hard to imagine someone surviving that.
It is.
Okay, so we have eyewitness accounts. We have the inherent brutality of crucifixion as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any physical evidence that supports the idea that Jesus actually died?
Well, the Gospels describe how a Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side with a spear and blood and water flowed out.
Okay, and what does that tell us?
Well, that separation of blood and water is actually very significant from a medical perspective because it's consistent with what happens when the heart has stopped beating and fluids begin to separate within the body.
Wow. So that's a pretty strong indication that death has occurred.
It is.
And to add to that, we also have the fact that Pontius Pilate himself was convinced of Jesus' death.
Right. The Gospels record that Pilate actually personally examined the body.
Before releasing it for burial.
Exactly. He wanted to make sure that Jesus was really dead.
And Pilate was not a man known for his mercy.
No, he was not.
Okay, so reason number 6, the burial of Jesus was public and secure.
Okay.
Why is that important?
Well, this point really addresses one of the most common counter-arguments to the resurrection.
Which is?
That Jesus' body was stolen, or that his disciples somehow faked his death.
Right. Those are classic conspiracy theories.
They are.
So how does the account of Jesus' burial debunk those claims?
Well, first of all, Jesus was buried in a tomb belonging to Joseph of Arimathea, who was a prominent member of the Jewish council.
So this wasn't just some random unmarked grave?
No, it was a well-known location.
Which would have made it pretty difficult to steal a body without anyone noticing.
Right. And on top of that, they sealed the tomb and posted guards.
So they rolled a large stone in front of the entrance.
They did. And they stationed Roman soldiers there to prevent any tampering.
Wow. It seems like they were really taking precautions.
They were.
Okay, so reason number 7. The evidence is convincing and reasonable.
Okay.
This seems like a pretty broad category. What does it include?
Well, this reason kind of encompasses a lot of different evidence.
Right.
But Emmaus Road Productions really focuses on the numerous appearances of Jesus after his resurrection.
Right. He appeared to individuals, small groups, even to crowds of over 500 people at once.
That's right.
Yeah.
And these weren't just fleeting glimpses or vague visions. I mean, Jesus spent extended periods of time with his disciples.
Yeah, they ate together, they talked, they even touched his wounds.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure that it was really him.
It's incredible to think about the impact that those early encounters must have had.
It is.
So we've explored these 7 reasons to believe in the resurrection.
We have.
What stands out to you as the most compelling piece of evidence?
For me, it's really the combination of the historical and physical evidence with the eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that the Gospels were written when eyewitnesses could easily challenge them adds a layer of authenticity that's hard to ignore.
I agree. And it's not just one piece of evidence in isolation. It's the convergence of all these different sources and perspectives that makes the case for the resurrection so powerful.
It is. And you also can't forget about the personal stories.
Right.
Emmaus Road Productions spends some time talking about individuals whose lives have been transformed by their belief in the resurrection.
Yeah, these are real people with real experiences who have found hope and meaning in the face of incredible challenges because of their faith.
It's powerful stuff.
It really is. And I think that's a great place to pause for now. So join us for the final part of this deep dive where we'll wrap up our exploration of the resurrection and consider what it all means for us today. Right, so welcome back to the show. We've been talking about the resurrection.
We have.
And we've gone through a lot of evidence and different arguments.
There's a lot of information.
Yeah, for why somebody might believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead.
Right.
And one of the things that Emmaus Road Productions brings up is this whole idea of using the Bible as a source.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people might be skeptical and say, well, you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible.
Right.
But they have a really good point.
Was that?
They say, why is it that we accept, these other ancient texts like Homer's Iliad as valid historical sources, but we automatically discount the Bible?
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we have video footage or perfectly preserved records from, 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. We have to rely on ancient documents for a lot of our understanding of history.
Exactly.
Right.
So why should the Bible be any different?
And, the Bible, despite being a collection of books written over centuries, has been meticulously preserved and studied. And it's actually one of the most well-documented and historically scrutinized texts that we have.
It really has stood the test of time.
It has.
And, Emmaus Road Productions even makes this really interesting analogy.
Okay.
They compare the Bible to long-running TV shows like Star Trek.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they point out that even with a team of writers working on a show, continuity errors pop up all the time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Little inconsistencies here and there.
Right. And yet the Bible, with all of its different authors and everything writing over centuries, maintains a remarkably consistent narrative.
Wow. That is pretty incredible.
Oh, it really is. So it really makes you think, if human-created stories struggle to stay consistent, wouldn't a fabricated account of Jesus' life and resurrection be even more likely to fall apart?
That's a great point.
Yeah. So where does this all leave us? What are the key takeaways from all of this?
Well, I think we've seen that the evidence for Jesus' existence as a historical figure is pretty overwhelming.
It's not really even up for debate at this point.
Right. We have both biblical and non-biblical sources corroborating his life, his death, and his claimed resurrection.
And then there are the arguments for his divinity as well.
Yes, rooted in his own claims. God the Father's affirmation and the testimonies of his disciples.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the evidence that we've been talking about that supports his death and burial.
Right, because that eliminates those alternative explanations.
Like a fake death or stolen body.
Exactly.
And then there are those numerous and detailed accounts of his post-resurrection appearances.
Yes, which for many believers really solidify the case.
Absolutely. So it's really the convergence of all of these different factors.
It is.
The historical evidence, the eyewitness accounts, the theological arguments.
All of it.
That make the resurrection such a pivotal event, not just in Christian history, but in Western civilization as a whole.
It's a cornerstone of our culture.
It really is. So what now?
Well, that's a question that each of us has to grapple with individually.
Right.
But I really encourage you to keep exploring.
To delve deeper into the sources.
Ask questions and seek answers.
Absolutely. It's a journey worth taking. And as always, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe or take a look at some of these other videos. And always remember Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Until next time, have a great day.